to Art Time with Bryant. I'm Bryant, of course. And what I have here in front of me is a picture that I'm doing, a landscape that I have started. Went ahead and started this. This is a wall, basically. What this is basically I live in a small town, and this is a wall that is right across the street from me in my neighbor's yard, actually. This wall was built sometime in the 1930s, and what I'm going to do here now is I started shading in some of the little bricks here, or the blocks. This is an old wall, and it's not made with just your cinder block type wall. This just old rocks basically is what they are. What they look like anyway is old rocks, and the black lines that you see here that make up the blocks right around in here. Now once I'm done shading all this, this is actually going to be, I'm going to change that to white. It's actually going to be the mortar. It's going to have a grayish white tint to it, basically, to make up the mortar. And this is something that you can do, and you can make your own wall, create your own wall. This is an idea that you can follow along with. Basically what I did here is I just drew the top line straight across. It doesn't have to be perfectly straight, because something that is this old, on top here is the actual yard, or the lawn, whatever you want to call it. And the wall is real old, so it may have some wavy spots in it where the ground has kind of settled a little bit here and there. And so that's the thing about landscapes, they don't have to be 100% perfect. And I'm just going to continue shading, and I'm just using a 2B pencil here. And anytime that you're shading anything, really, you really want to start out a little bit light. You don't want to go too dark. And I know this is graphite, so you can always erase. But the thing about it is, if you go too dark and you have to do a lot of erasing, then you might mess up your paper. And you don't want to mess up your paper, because if you have to do a whole lot of erasing, because the darker it is and you need to erase it, then you're going to have to press down and erase pretty good and pretty hard sometimes, and sometimes that will wind up just leaving marks all in your paper, and it's not going to be such a great landscape once you do that. But what I'm doing here now, I know it's probably may seem a little bit boring to you, but I'm just doing some light shading on all of these little circles. Made some half circles, some rectangles, and some squares, and just different type of shapes, because the wall is so old and it's kind of got like these old rocks. That's why I call them as rocks. They may not be actually rocks. Kind of looks more like, to me, just something homemade, you know, basically out of concrete that was in the shape of different shapes of rocks, rectangles and squares. Notice when I get to the end, when I'm shading the very end here, sometimes you find it difficult to get to the very end of your paper. But you don't have to worry about that. When we start blending it, we'll start using a blending stump when we go in to blend this, and the blending stump can kind of blend it and push it over to the edge of the paper for us. But what I'm doing is just lightly shading, and there's different ways that you can shade this. I choose to go in the horizontal direction when I'm shading, at least on this landscape anyway. You know, there may be times where you might want to, you know, go in a vertical motion, you know, when you're shading. But when you blend it, time you use your blending stump or whatever you're going to blend it with, you're not going to see a big difference in it anyway. And drawing a wall like this is really good practice. You can use your shading techniques while you're drawing something creative. all at the same time. You can take, so like I'm doing now, is I'm shading some of these really dark, not real dark, but darker than the others, and some of these are lighter than the others. And you know, they're just little, kind of little circles and little squares. That's a good shading technique that you can use. You can always just take one square like this, and you can kind of shade it. Then you can kind of get a little bit more lighter on your pencil here, and then you can just use your little shading technique as you go along. Now, one of the biggest tools besides, when you're using graphite, one of the biggest tools besides the pencil, the graphite pencil, is an eraser. Eraser isn't just for fixing and correcting mistakes. It's actually a handy drawing tool. And if you look at a lot of folks that use graphite and that draw a lot with graphite or charcoal, you know, you will also see that they use the eraser as a tool, not just to fix a mistake. So if you're seeing someone that is drawing using graphite or charcoal, and you see them using an eraser, that doesn't mean that they're made a mistake and are correcting mistakes. I'd say about 90% of the time it means that they are using it as a tool, as a drawing tool. So once I get all of this little blocks shaded in, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my eraser. Let me show you an eraser. This right here is actually, it's one of my favorite erasers, I guess. It's an eraser pen. It basically has a fine tip on it. You can use it to define some fine areas, get really fine lines with this. It's a good eraser tool, and on larger areas, this is my little handy dandy kneaded eraser, and it's really good for skies, drawing some skies and some clouds and different things like that. And if you don't have a lot of money to spend on your tools, like this right here, I bought this as a 3-pack at Walmart. Basically, it's a little bit thicker, as you can see on the end here, but what you can do is you can actually just take your knife and you can just kind of make a sharp point out of it with your knife, and you can make it where it will erase fine lines. And if you just want to leave it thick, you can leave it thick as well. But these are some nice tools to use. And last but not least, on the tools here that I'm using for this project, I'll be using this blending stump. And when you use a blending stump, if you're going to use just graphite, then you don't have to really worry about it. But if you're an artist and you use graphite and charcoal pencil, you want to use one blending stump for each medium. You want to dedicate one for just charcoal pencil, because charcoal is a lot darker than just graphite, and you want to use one just for graphite. So back to just a little more shading, and I just want to show you on this video basically how I got this retainer wall, or I keep saying retainer walls. I guess it is a retainer wall up against the yard there, but it's just a nice wall with the, I call it just a homemade mortar that's in between, that we're going to be creating later with the eraser tool and the blending stump. But all these dark lines here I'm going to lighten those lines up to represent the mortar after I blend all of these in. I've got a lot of these shaded. Some of them shaded are lighter than the others. Now these dark shades here that you see, these I have already used a blending stump. I was just testing them and seeing how they were going to work out. And this light part right here, you know, I've just done some light shading. I haven't done any blending with the blending stump yet. But as I take my blending stump and then I start doing some blending, also for smaller areas, I may break out my little tortilla It's about the same thing, kinda. It's just a little smaller with a finer point. But as you see, it's real good. You can go in a circular motion to get a real good blend. And when you come to the edges, you might want to go in a vertical motion or a horizontal just to define the edges real good. But you see how light this area was just by taking and shading it. See, if you can't get all of it at the edge of your paper with the pencil on the shading, you can take your blending stump and you can just kind of flick it to the right or to the edge of your paper, and you can get it all colored in that way. I'm going to skip around on a few of these, and you can see as I blend how it darkens them up just a little bit. That's why it doesn't take a lot of dark shading. That's why you always want to start out with a light shading, like I mentioned before. Start out with a light shading, because by the time you get to your blending stump, and you can always use a Q-tip if you don't have a blending stump handy. But you start out with a light shading, and as you get to the blending part, whatever you do decide to blend with, notice how these areas begin to get, a little bit darker. And to give it just some good contrast, you can leave some areas, even when you blend it, you can kind of try to blend some a little lighter than the others. And the way that you blend some areas lighter than the others is basically just a little light flick of the blending stump. You don't press down as much, basically. It's the same thing with pen pressure or pencil pressure. The more pressure you put with a pencil or a pen, the darker your ink or graphite is going to be. So the same technique applies when you're shading with a blending stump. The harder you press, the darker your shade. The lighter you press, the lighter your shade's going to be. So this is basically how you create this wall here. And if you want to create your own wall and get some practice, just take your pencil and just draw you a little line to indicate your border here of how high you want your wall to be. And just like I did here, I just went with some designs of some squares and some rectangles, and sometimes like around here I did some half circle shapes. You just make it however you want it to make it unique. Then we can just shade them all in. But that's going to be all for this video right now. I just wanted to show you how to build this wall and draw this wall out, and how you need to shade it, and how you can blend it with a blending stump or a Q-tip. But in the next video, what I'm going to do, I'm going to have all this shaded in, I'm going to have it all blended in, and then I'm going to go in with my eraser and I'm going to show you how to create the mortar effects, because as I shade, you can see it almost blends all of the graphite together, and you really can't see a lot of the lines like you can here. You can see the lines here, but I haven't shaded anything here. But as you shade and blend over here, you can see all the lines. And I'm not going to blend every one of these. I'm going to blend a lot of them. I'm going to leave some unblended. That way it will give it a little bit of a contrast and a little bit of a different look, and I think it would make it look a lot better that way. But until next time, if you haven't already subscribe to my YouTube channel and stay up to date when new videos are posted. You'll get an email if you are a subscriber, and you can watch all the new videos, and don't miss the video that's coming up next, when I take my eraser and I create the mortar, and I'll show you how to make a good little wall for the landscape. And later on, I'm going to put some trees up here, because this is going to be the lawn area or the yard. I'm going to put some trees up here and little sky and just different things. Who knows where it may go, but I'll see you next time, and thank you.